Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākine ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei, mauri ora. So welcome everyone to the Save Science Coalition pre-election forum. My name is Dr. Lucy Stewart. I'm the co-president of the New Zealand Association of Scientists. For my sins, I have been one long enough that I did this event 3 years ago as well. So I will be emceeing today and asking the questions. I will say that there will be an opportunity for questions from the floor after we've moved through the questions that we've already provided to candidates. We did this because we are really interested today in kind of having some deep discussion about the science policy of the parties who are represented here today. We're not looking for gotchas. We really want to know what your parties are interested in doing. In terms of who we have here, we have Ben Wylie-van Eerd, who is a candidate for the Opportunities Party. Are you still called that, or is it just TOP?
Opportunity Party.
Opportunities Party is fine, yes. So he's standing in Hutt South, and he's been a candidate for them for a number of elections now. We have Dr. David Wilson from New Zealand First. We have Reuben Davidson from the Labour Party, and we have Scott Willis from the Greens. And these gentlemen are all the science spokespeople for their respective parties. We did invite someone from every parliamentary party, but unfortunately Dr. Parmjit Parmar and Minister Simmons were not interested in attending. So to kick it off, we're going to ask Fleur Fitzsimmons, who's the National Secretary of the PSA, which is a member organisation of the Save Science Coalition, to say a few words.
Na mihi mai o ha, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. And I just want to start with some important acknowledgements. I want to acknowledge you first, Lucy, for your role as a constant champion of science, but also for your instrumental role in making sure that the Save Science Coalition was set up. Also want to acknowledge Claire Nixon, who's the PSA science organiser, who's done a lot of work in getting Save Science to find its footing, to publish reports and to be a really effective and new voice for science in New Zealand. I want to acknowledge the PSA Science Committee, who happen to be meeting in Wellington, who are here right now, and we've got Grant Reddy, the chair, right at the top there, and various members of the PSA Science Committee here in the audience as well. I also want to acknowledge the candidates, and in particularly Scott, Reuben and Ben, first of all of whom have played a role in supporting the Save Science Coalition and the kaupapa of the work that we've done. And also, obviously, David, you're very welcome here, and hopefully you can also fit in with that kind of introduction in the future. But New Zealand First has a long way to go when it comes to investing in science, because they've been a part of what we've seen this government do, which is to dismiss over 700 science workers in our science system. We have seen the dismantling of public good science in New Zealand, and we need to see that turned around. And that's why this election is such high stakes for us. We need to see parties come into Parliament with a true commitment to investing in science, and that will include overcoming the destructive cuts that we've seen this government impose on our science sector. So it's not enough just to commit to investing in science. We're going to need some repair work underway as well. And I want to really just outline some of the key criteria that Save Science Coalition has identified for political parties going into this election, because they're very, very important. We need to see lifting investment to at least 2% of GDP in science, and particularly with public science having a minimum share. We need to see genuine, stable, non-contestable funding for public good research, and that's been dismantled by this government as well. We need to see a whole-of-system workforce plan, and that's a significant piece of work. We've lost many of our scientists to overseas countries. We need a plan to get them back and also invest in the future of our science workforce. We also need to see a strong commitment to treating science infrastructure as a national asset, which we all know it is. So I really welcome you asking questions of our candidates, and really just want to acknowledge all of the people that put this event together, because it's a high-stakes election for science, and the answers we get today are very important. Thanks.
All right. right, we're going to move into the long form questions now. So just for our panellists, obviously you guys have a microphone. I think what we'll do is we'll start at one end for one question and then come back the other way for the question after to make it simple. I could randomise it, but with only 4 of you, that seems a bit over the top. So the first question is, there has been a long history of various reviews into the science system, all of which have broadly agreed on what the problems with the science system are. For example, unproductive competition, insufficient funding, uncertain career pathways, lack of diversity, and uneven access to science infrastructure, among others. Thinking of the current science system reforms and the problems it sets out to resolve, which problems do you think the current reforms have successfully addressed or are addressing, and which problems do you think remain unresolved?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I maintain hope for the current set of reforms that they can get us into a better place. I think we're yet to see any meaningful changes from them yet, but I mean, we've only been through them for about a year. I do have a bit of a personal stake in this as well, because I lost my job because of these science reforms, so forgive me if I'm a little bit negative on them at the moment. I hope to see that in the future state of the science system, we do reduce, with this new set of reforms, some of the unproductive competition over funding. That's not yet there, but it certainly has the potential to be there, and it's something that's expressed in the documents. And stable career paths is the thing that I also hope something can be done about. There's a long way to go, and we'll get into it with the rest of the questions, I think. But I'm broadly still positive about the current changes, and would like, if we were part of a government come December this year, I think we'd try to carry them forwards and maybe make some tweaks rather than start over again. I think that'd be the main thing, is just to keep the momentum going forwards. We don't need a new set of changes.
Kia ora, everybody. David Wilson. Fleur forgot to tell you that I was actually a Deputy Director and Director of the Institute of Public Policy at AUT for just under 10 years. I'm really very aware of the competition that was around then between social science and hard science in terms of funding. We obviously always had a challenge with the social science part of it, and I'm interested to know from you today in your questions whether or not you believe economics and economic development is a social science, and there'll be a good discussion to have along the way. In terms of the changes, I think broadly in agreement with the changes at a high level, because we've often seen this kind of linear approach to basic research through to innovation and commercialisation, as if it works along a line. I'm far more in favour of a kind of mission-led or market-led approach, and you think of the whole system as an ecosystem. So it'd be good to have that discussion along the way today as well. So thank you very much for inviting me here. I look forward to it.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you to everyone for being here today, but also I wanted to start by just acknowledging the number of meetings, conversations, catch-ups and opportunities to connect with people in our sector across my term as spokesperson from opposition in the Labour Party. It's been hugely appreciated, and I've learnt a lot and gotten a really good understanding of what these restructures and changes and cuts look like from the people who are actually dealing with them day to day. So thank you to everyone who's provided that feedback across the last couple of years. I think we have a bad habit in government of asking for reviews and then getting a bunch of findings or recommendations and then just sort of cherry picking the ones we like or the ones we think we can afford with the existing envelope of money. And I mean, the Science System Advisory Group report was very clear. This is not a menu of options you can choose. This is a set of recommendations that require to be picked up or implemented in full to be the effective reform that I think many people agreed was required across the sector. So it's been frustrating to see such a narrow focus and such a select number of recommendations being acted upon. I think that as a result, the objective of the reforms hasn't been achieved because they simply haven't picked up the recommendations in the fullness that they were intended to be.
I think there's a lot of glum faces around the room, and I understand why. We have seen a Prime Minister say we're going to brutally commercialise the science sector, and that's not how you build a healthy science ecosystem. So, I mean, in thinking of what has been resolved, I don't think anything's been resolved, but there's certainly been an effort to reduce unproductive competitiveness through the PROs. So that's some success, and we should look to enhance that. But my goodness, when we've lost 700 science workers from the sector, you could not say that we've got certain career pathways in science. When we're seeing our young scientists leaving in droves, you could not say we've got career certainty. And when we see the shutdown of Science of Callaghan, we really do need to fix the funding foundations for science infrastructure. We can't hope to attract top quality scientists to New Zealand when we have the sector in disarray. Who's going to want to come to run down institutions where there is no certainty of a future? So the funding foundations are absolutely critical. And in terms of diversity, we really need to get the mojo back in science, connect science with society, with business, rather than this myopic focus on growth for growth's sake. It will eat us up. We will run out of room to do anything.
Thank you all. Our next question is, public good research refers to research that aims to provide a benefit for society or the environment rather than commercial gain. Can you please discuss your party's view on the value of public good science to our country?
Well, I mean, we are facing a climate crisis at the moment. We have states of emergency happening virtually every single week. And we have a science system that's been emptied of some of our top talent in climate science. So we can't bottle essence of flooded farm and sell it in Britomart. We can't bottle the windswept plains of Southland and sell it somewhere in Courtney Place. We need an understanding of the natural world to be able to solve those wicked problems. We can't hope to deal with mis and disinformation when we cut all our humanities social science funding. And these are things that reach to the heart of our democracy. So we've got a real lack. We need that funding back.
I think if I think about the community that I live in and the electorate that I come from of Christchurch East, and it's true of a number of electorates across New Zealand, if not all electorates, a bit of public good is actually what these communities need right now. So to have a government that is not committed to public good science and research and not committed to supporting those communities through the changes that we know have very real positive impacts is hugely disappointing and hard to understand how that would be possible at this point in our history, or would be a priority or not a priority at this point in our history. I think Professor Nicola Gaston put it very well, and I've used this quote a number of times, where she, as has she hopefully, and a number of you too, she talks about it literally, this current approach as being like pulling an apple tree out by its roots to be able to harvest its fruit. And I think that's a pretty clear image of what this current approach looks like, and how short-sighted it is, but also how detrimental it is to the future of the sector if it is allowed to continue.
Yeah, I find it a little interesting that we can wax lyrical like we've just heard, that we can afford all of these things, given that the previous government left us with $180 billion in debt, costing us $9 billion a year to service it. There are some things that we have to focus on. That said, What a stupid thing to say. But anyway, that said, some evidence here about some of these changes. Research into how we move cow urine to fertiliser. Patent research on the molecules to reduce methane emissions from cattle. Probiotics to reduce methane emissions from cattle. There's a series of them here. One that we've led, which is research into supercritical geothermal, $60 million going into understanding how we can take advantage of a natural resource that we have here in a long-term sustainable energy production. It will change our world if we do this, which is why I referred to right at the beginning that a lot of what's been done in these recent changes is switching from the linear approach from basic research to what we hope will turn into something that's going to be useful to a market-led, mission-led approach, which is both the things I've just mentioned, because part of our issue with dairy cattle is methane emissions. So the science has been switched towards that. Part of the issues we have as New Zealand, and if we want to address climate change, the most important thing we can do, the single most important thing we can do is have innovation in and around green energy, which is what we're doing. Already, we're one of the best nations in the world. This is one of our competitive advantages. We can take advantage of these things. So I think the twist is not black or white. We still need basic research, absolutely. But out of the $1.2 billion that went into basic research, 122 million has been taken out and turned it into this kind of mission-led focused approach. And yes, commercialisation is in there. In regards to how we bring the public sector or public good research together with the private sector, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a two-way street. So if you start thinking about what I've just talked about, there are reasons for both the private sector and the public sector to be involved in that.
Yes, public good research definitely is one of the things that needs to be within our science system. In New Zealand in general, over the last 10, perhaps 20 years, I don't think we've done a very good job of valuing public goods, but they're certainly valuable. Knowing how to control flooding water, for example, is valuable because it means that we have less flooding events, less people who lose their homes have to make insurance claims, do those kinds of things. Understanding more about climate change will help us more effectively stop it from happening, prevent its negative downsides. Understanding about animal diseases will help our agricultural sector. It'll help animal welfare besides. There are lots of ways in which public good research quite obviously does have public benefits, and the accounting for it is not always there in New Zealand. And that's, I think, one of the areas that we are weakest in. In the absence of that kind of accounting, it makes perfect sense to set aside some money for public good research. That's aside from the question of, close to market research versus blue skies research, which also needs to be considered. But if we're just considering the public good part, then without a reasonable accounting of public goods, which we just don't have in New Zealand, then we need to set aside some money for public good science so that it doesn't disappear.
Thinking of funding, which we've heard a bit about already, would your party increase funding into the science system, decrease it, or keep it the same? Please explain why.
Increase it. Very, very easy answer. We're committed this year in the Opportunity Party to raising GDP, rating expenditure on science as a percentage of GDP up to 2%, which is a goal that we've had for a very, very long time and not achieved. We're also committed to raising the government spend up to 0.6% immediately. That will restore what funding has been lost and will also raise us further from where we have been. I mean, even before we had these harsh cuts this year, last couple of years, we were still sort of, after inflation, we were going backwards in the science funding in New Zealand for a very, very long time. We've had to do more with less, and we've got quite good at that, but you can't keep doing that forever. If you want to continue to grow the scientific capability in New Zealand, you do have to actually resources at some point. On just a note on the business expenditure side of things as well, we have been doing in New Zealand a really, really good job in the private sector of growing business expenditure on R&D over the past 10, 20 years. It's been really encouraging to see those numbers go up. Last year's report, we saw those numbers start to stall. And I think that's really, really, really worrying. If you look at the OECD data, there is no country in the world that has managed to reach 2% total GDP spending on R&D without having a substantially higher spend from the government. And I think that's what we're starting to see now in those business R&D expenditure tasks, is that the business is getting to the limits of what it can grow to without having the support there from the public side. So let's bring that support from the public side right back.
Yeah, some interesting comments there from you. Thank you for that, Ben. Government lifting science investment in New Zealand up to 2% of GDP. Yes, please. 3 would be better. And we all know this. But what I would say is that we've got to get better at actually partnering with the private sector, with public good research. We've got to be good at saying, these are the issues that are facing us. Can you join with us? And the comment, I think it was Reuben said before about us losing researchers, I agree. We do not want that. It's fundamental to the future of our economy and future of our society. Absolutely fundamental. But when we do something like supercritical geothermal research, that attracts scientists because we can be world leaders. So I think that's actually really fundamental, is we've got to start thinking like that. What are the things we have to agree on? We have to agree on the fact that we need to be really careful about what our primary sector produces and how it produces it and all those sorts of things, which is like some of the projects I was mentioning before. But I do think we've got to actually be a little bit more mission-led about what those big things are that can benefit New Zealand, that we can attract scientists both from within and from overseas to build experience in certain areas.
So prior to the release of our manifesto, I'm not going to be in a position to make policy announcements today, and that's a line that at this point in the electoral cycle we get to use a lot. But I guess what I do see is that at the moment what we've seen is a series of announcements that have been dressed up as increases or new funding into the sector, and they haven't been. They've been redirections or as the result of deep cuts in other areas. So I think we have to make sure that that we challenge all parties in the lead up to the election, but also the new government after the election around announcements and around the fact that it can't just be moving funding from the existing envelope and dressing that up as new funding into the sector. I think that the risk is that when that happens, it destabilises the sector to the point where private funding is less likely to arrive as well, because it's so undervalued and that's the signal that's received out there to those other places where money might come from too. So I think we do need to be really careful that we're not just moving the deck chairs around.
Greens have a long-standing approach to ensure that we have adequate funding, so we've got reliable funding tailored to the research context and above the OECD spend relative to GDP. So that's a long-standing Green policy. I hear David saying supercritical is going to be where the science spend's going. I mean, really? Well, okay, but mission-led. We've got a government that's mission-led. It's putting $200 million into the gas security fund, which is a direct risk to some of our trading partnerships. It's throwing $1 billion plus, plus $1 billion at an LNG terminal. And if we're thinking about the research possibilities, but also our ability to use our IP to transform the country into homegrown energy and to help with other countries who are facing the same challenges, we are really putting our resource in the wrong place very clearly at the moment. It's not that we have a shortage, we are simply not putting resource into the productive spaces that will develop our country.
Another core area identified as requiring improvement by the Science System Advisory Group was enabling collaboration. What actions would your party take to enable collaboration between scientists and researchers, either within or across institutions in the public science system and independent research organisations?
Well, we can see the true value of collaboration. I think the McDermott Institute, for example, has shown what is enabled when we look for all of those connections, when we try and make those possible. And that it really comes down to ensuring we've got the funding to support the connection between the research sector and our universities. So we need to keep boosting that. We can't simply have it stop at, have a limited period and a hope that somehow it's going to magically continue. So a long-term strategy to support a thriving science ecosystem is absolutely critical.
I think the positive intent of the restructure was to enable greater collaboration. But when you create a more competitive environment, one of the consequences of that is that kills collaboration, because people are competing for the same pot, and that pot has got smaller because those funds have been diverted off, or I think the term for cuts is reprioritised, apparently. So that funding has been reprioritised elsewhere. So the intent for collaboration goes as a result. And I think the question for government then is what can it do to support collaboration, but also what can it do to get out of the way if it is actually the thing preventing collaboration in some of those spaces. So I think there's a number of levers that government has to ensure that collaboration can continue, can be encouraged and can be supported. One of the things that I'm constantly impressed by is how collaborative our science innovation tech sector is, and how the myth that that people have always locked themselves away in rooms and not shared what they're working on and how it's going, how untrue that is. The risk is that becomes the reality if the funding continues to shrink.
Yeah, I agree with Reuben on a couple of points there, that the intention absolutely with the new PROs is better collaboration across all the different research institutes that we've had in the past. And it is challenging. I think any of us that have been involved in interdisciplinary research or multidisciplinary research, it's not that easy, as I'm sure you will all know. So the way that this has been led from the top, if you like, in terms of our national innovation system, is to group things into certain areas that we think are vitally important for us, so such as the primary industry and bioeconomy PRO. To me, that's absolutely fundamental to us as a nation. Who saved us through the global financial crisis? Our exporters, our primary exporters. Who saved us through COVID in terms of our exports and inward investment? Primary sector was the biggest winner. What we've got to do is actually take advantage of the bioeconomy opportunities that come from our private sector. And there are many, there are plenty. So just go to a Reddit Institute conference and you'll see what I mean. You know, new ingredients, new biopharmaceuticals, new functional foods, all those sorts of things. Would not want to give them away, such as we're almost doing with our kiwi fruit IP and the free trade agreement with India. Would like to sort that one out. Thanks very much, because you know, all the albumins that we're looking to send over there. Albumins are primary use for infant food, which is the next stage up. The primary use in sports science, and so on and so forth. For me, that focus from the top is going to be fundamental to our future prosperity. So there's two things going on there for me. Good research leading to value-added products that we own and our intellectual property here in New Zealand. That all can contribute to our prosperity into the future. So I think it's too early to turn around and say it's not working. We need to give it some chance. We need to give it some fuel. And I've seen some very fascinating projects coming through already in all of the PROs, including the new Institute on Advanced Research and Technology.
In terms of collaboration, probably the best thing we can do is look at how our funding system is going to support that. Now, the changes to the funding system from the current set of reforms are really not yet worked through. I don't have great visibility on where they're at the moment. I don't know about the rest of you in this room. But I think it's worth hoping that there will be some more stable long-term funding in that. Certainly Opportunity would be wanting to bring that element into the funding system. And that kind of funding is, I think, the kind of funding that can best support collaboration between different institutions. You are not sort of forced to chase your own research and your own grants. If you have a little bit more stable funding, it gives room and opportunity to work together with other people to see what you can make of it. The other thing I'd say is that it's also important that we're collaborating with the private sector. That wasn't part of the question, but it's something that I think is worth bringing up just because we have a particular policy in Opportunity about bringing in some new bulk funding for research institutes, public and private, and polytechs to work with private industry. Certainly at universities, the funding structure at the moment very heavily discourages you from working with the private sector because every time you do that, every time you step away from publications, every time you step away from conferences, it counts against you eventually in the PBRF funding model that we currently have. So adding some element of funding which does reward collaboration between the public science sector and the private sector is an important part of changing our science system for the better, in our opinion.
Thank you. Next question. Can you all please discuss your party's views on public funding for the humanities, social sciences and mātauranga Māori?
Yeah, it needs to be put back in. Very simple answer for that one. It was unbelievable that it was taken out. It did not have the support of the science community. We'd be putting that back in as soon as we can.
It's almost an unfair question for me. Running a research institute which is focused on social science research, and I knew how difficult it was for us to get Marsden funding, for example, which tended to flip to the positive scientists and the physical scientists. But in a nutshell, we were at 1.2 billion in public research funding, am I correct? And they've diverted 122 million into some of these other things we've been talking about. Your 0.6% is 2.7 billion. It's a stretch. It's a stretch. Love to be able to achieve it. Not quite sure how we can do it in the current fiscal situation. So if someone can give me that answer, because as you know, everything's a trade-off. How do we actually make this work for us? I think one of the things that I remember a lot from all my economic development work is wherever you went, particularly in the US, that if anyone wanted funding or finance, they would present the outcome rather than ask for the money. So what are the outcomes that we will achieve from more investment into social science and humanities research? Answer that question first, and I think that might give you a leverage into future funding.
Yeah, I think it's really important that these aren't framed up as nice-to-haves, and the risk is that they can make very easy political footballs, and all too often we see. I was going to say journalists or reporters, but actually politicians are the worst at it. Cherry-picking projects and then belittling them and the people who've worked on them and the massive positive potential outcome that will come from that research, that work, that funded project. From a Mātauranga Māori perspective and from a Māori and science perspective, when I am in my home electorate of Christchurch East, if I'm in Aranui or Linwood, or any of the suburbs in that electorate, I want to see that young Māori, young Pacifica, young New Zealanders see themselves and see a place for them in the science sector and the science community, and a viable way of studying through school, tertiary, and then through PROs or private companies. All too often, that's not the case, and I've had a number of people at the moment say to me they couldn't look a high school student in the eye and say to them, pursue this career, it's viable into the future. Now, earlier, David said, and we're going to agree and disagree on a number of things today, David, as we often do at Select Committee as well, But you talked about COVID and you talked about who saved us. And it's an interesting question, right? Because there's lots of answers to that question, but the vaccine is definitely one of them. Saved thousands and thousands of lives. Now, the important thing here is that a vaccine can be scientifically effective, and in that case it was. But there are some communities who won't trust it. And the social sciences is how we find out why that is, how to connect with those communities, and how to make sure that it can save them too.
Yeah, we need the social sciences, we need the humanities, we need Mataranga Māori to strengthen our democracy and to show us who we really are as well. And I think, to Reuben's point, we've seen the success of a COVID crisis that was avoided largely through science, through investing in our health of our communities. And then we saw that weaponised through mis and disinformation, through conspirituality, weaponised by politicians. And that has weakened us as a nation. So the only way we can counteract that and strengthen our democracy is ensuring we have an informed community, an informed society, where we're countering and able to rationalise rather than simply moving to a more barbaric society where we run down every little rabbit hole. And that's what our humanities can give us. And I think back to work I did with GNS prior to my political days, looking at the social acceptance of green hydrogen. There are lots of myths around new technologies that need to be addressed, and social science is one of the places we can do that. We can have all the widgets we like, but we need that social science to help make things effective.
Just so you're all okay, I'm not going to get in the COVID debate.
We're not asking any questions about that at this point. The science value chain refers to the pathway from fundamental research to applied research to product development, noting that the later stages of the pathway rely on knowledge gained in the earlier stages. How will your party ensure that the underlying fundamental research is funded and supported in our system?
So this comes back to funding, to basic funding, ensuring we boost funding. Foundational research, the type of stuff that we know we need, we don't know where we're going to get to, but we know that we've got a question that can't be answered yet and we want to answer it, is absolutely foundational in developing everything that comes from that. And sometimes we'll have great wins and sometimes we won't. But, we are essentially animals that walk upright on two legs with an incredible sense of curiosity. And we need to enable that curiosity to be able to make use of it and find the surprising results that come out of that. So essentially, investment in our foundational research, that's the only way we're going to have a thriving science ecosystem.
Someone told me that the best thing you can hear someone say in a lab is that shouldn't be doing that. Because when that happens, it means that there's something new that's been discovered. Or potentially there's something new that's been discovered. There's something that an unexpected result, and who knows what will come from it. I think that as politicians setting science policy, we should say that shouldn't be doing that when we see people who have made those discoveries having to sell them off or commercialise them way too early. So at that very early stage, when they can see manifold things that could come out of that discovery, they are instead having to go, I don't have the security of funding, I'm going to have to take this offshore, or I'm going to have to share or sell this idea beyond being able to commercialise it, or rather further explore it to its full potential myself. So I think as politicians, a lot of the time we need to get out of the way, but when that's happening, we need to be concerned because something's broken in the system. And I know I bang on a lot about Christchurch East, but I'm the MP in that electorate, so I will continue to. We've got this amazing cluster of companies, Zethos, Aspiring Materials, Swaltech, who have come out of UC, who have got amazing potential, fantastic setups, and are doing great things. But that's because they had that time in that university environment to make sure that they could safely commercialise what they had without losing it elsewhere. And I think we need to see more of that. We don't just need to see more of it, we need to enable more of it.
Yeah, I like what Reuben just said in terms of his example there, which was university research that's being commercialised. But I can show just as many examples coming from the other end where it's been private sector innovation that's created a new research sector. I think probably the best version of research I've ever heard came from an economist, which might go some way to understanding why they said this. But to that person, he said, research is a process of decreasing uncertainty. So I like that because it has some of the scepticism in there that you have at the beginning, that some things will go wrong with during the process. So I don't see it as linear as what was framed, where we talk fundamental research and right through the chain. I think it can come from all different parts. It's how we join those things together. And absolutely what Reuben talked about, there is now a PRO which fits neatly around that focus on tech in a number of areas. So I think the government's made a real attempt at trying to, if you like, capture that ecosystem approach rather than the traditional linear approach. So I think that's where we fit. Now, let me give you an example. No more whale song to address Kauri dieback, please. And maybe some of us might be in a position where we're thinking, hang on a minute, we might have done some of this swing to ourselves here. At the same time, our party put in the ground 30,000 kauri seedlings with Ngāti Rehia in the north. And they're now at a point where they've got native undergrowth and they're looking for scientists to help them to address kauri dieback in a real experimental way, alongside, if you like, utilising that taonga both for themselves, their hapu, and other opportunities with tourism and the like. So for me, that's kind of an ecosystem approach we're actually getting going. Sometimes you can do a bit of strategic doing rather than strategic thinking, learning as we go. So I do agree, more fundamental research, but let's remain open in how we can work together with various groups, whether it's hapu or private sector or whomever, to advance some of these things.
When the humanities and social sciences were ruled out of contestable funding 1 year, 2 years ago, I forget, 2 years ago now, there was quite a lot of public outcry about that. But at the very same time, they changed the rules around the Marsden grant such that a third of the grants had to show commercial benefit. The Marsden grant was the place in the New Zealand funding system for complete blue skies research, investigator-led, purely curiosity-driven to live. And the fact that they have now pulled a third of that away from that blue skies research and into the commercial sector, which is what largely the rest of the science funding system is already facilitating, I was shocked by that. I was genuinely shocked by that. I thought there would be much more complaint. I'm going to complain about it now. I think that was a terrible decision. I would want to restore the Marsden Fund to its intended purpose of being blue skies research, investigator curiosity-led, without having to show any route to commercial success or growth or anything like that. That is not the place for Marsden Fund science. There's plenty of other places in the science system for that. Let's restore the Marsden Fund to that intended purpose.
Well, first we will have to restore the Marsden Fund, which no longer exists as of next year. The final long-form question is, how would your party ensure science infrastructure, and by infrastructure we mean equipment, technology, databases, that the infrastructure that benefits the entire research system is sustainably funded separate from competitive funding pools?
Again, this is a problem that the science sector is facing, that also basically every other sector, well, every other part of the public sector in New Zealand is facing, is that we don't have good asset management across the board. We don't have good management of our scientific assets, but we also don't have good asset management of our water systems. Everybody in this town knows that all too well. This is a kind of accounting and expertise that we need to build back into the the public sector, so that every organisation knows what it's got and can show that it is doing the maintenance required to keep it, rather than just draw it down over time, draw down our water infrastructure, drawing down our scientific equipment and having no plan to replace them. That is a requirement that I think we should start having reporting on, including within science institutions. But again, this is one way that I said at the beginning, we've been asked to do more with less, and that's one way you can sort of get away with doing more with less for a while. At the fundamental, at the beginning, at the motivation for doing those kind of things is funding which just does not keep up with inflation. So, our party's major approach to that is to restore inflation indexing, restore funding to the science sector. But in addition to that, we would like to see a bit more accounting in science as well as the rest of the public sector. Where are our assets? What state are they in? Can you show that you are doing what it takes to maintain them so that they are passed on to the next generation?
You're talking about infrastructure. I think it's a good question. What you see coming through in terms of some of the funding at the moment is looking at things like AI, quantum computing, new materials, and so on. Those are opportunities, those are openings, but it's more than that, because our data infrastructure is pretty important to that. So, for example, if any of you are involved in research projects that uses large amounts of data and computational stuff, where does it end up? Ends up in the US, in one of the data centres there that can handle it. And then they charge you for it, actually quite a lot. So we do need to think about how we handle that into the future, because we don't want to be the hermit kingdom. We do want to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that, for example, AI provides us without it affecting other things that we don't like. So I think that's actually an opportunity for scientists to think through that. How can we actually improve our infrastructure and our computation, our research capability and capacity through AI? And what does that demand? And what are the unintended consequences and the intended consequences of that? I think the whole government is actually struggling with that right now, because there's a lot of investment out there waiting, and I can tell you why. New Zealand produces green energy. About 85% of our energy is green. The rest of the world likes that, and I can prove it. And the other side of it is we're politically stable, geopolitically stable in certain areas, and if, for example, Southland, which is one of the ones that's projected to be put in place, doesn't use as much power, and they need power and water to cool it, and no, there is no sludge coming out from it because it's all recycled and used about the same amount as a farm. So misinformation out there is not helpful, but essentially on top of that, we've already calculated what it will be in terms of power. So if you take some time
David, could we
and have a look at the Southland energy strategy,
address the actual question or move on?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess to answer the question, there's a real trap in the competitive funding model currently, which is that people spend lots and lots of time working on funding applications. I know this. I used to work in broadcasting and media. I spent a lot of my time writing funding applications. You also end up making and producing and submitting and being disappointed about more funding applications than you need to be, because you just keep having to have as many irons in the fire as you possibly can. The thing that I think the biggest mismatch here is that the timeline and cycles within the science community are not 3-year cycles. The political cycle currently is a 3-year cycle, and in that time you can have 3 different ministers. We've gone from Collins to Retty to Simmons, and even with the same blueprint, their interpretation of that and how they roll that out is open to interpretation. Can be quite different approaches from each of them. That does not provide any kind of long-term certainty for the science sector. I think that what we need to see is is a plan from government that provides the science sector with the certainty that it needs, that it can get on, but also that internationally other investment, other funds, other projects, other people who want to come to New Zealand to contribute to that sector can see that it has the stability and the certainty that they need to feel secure in doing that.
Thank you. Just to address a really slight mistake, David, I think you confusing energy and electricity. Those two different, critically different things in our system. Really, I think we've got a big question about infrastructure in New Zealand, and the Infrastructure Commission has come out recently and said we are uniquely poor in this nation at investing in infrastructure and maintaining infrastructure, and we need to be boosting the support. Essentially 60 cents in every dollar should go into maintenance and renewal of our infrastructure, and the same sits with science. We should not be having to boost, if we want a thriving science ecosystem, we can't expect it to simply emerge through contestable funding. We need to invest in that infrastructure to make sure we have a place for our top scientists and for our up-and-coming scientists and for our youth to look to and to practice. So we need to decouple those two things. We can't simply have contestable funding to boost the infrastructure we need. It's an infrastructure deficit we face.
Thank you all. You were supplied with some quick-fire yes or no questions. Given time, I'm actually going to skip those because I do want to give the audience a chance to ask at least one question. So, audience, this is your turn. Oh, I see we have someone who's been waiting very patiently.
Thank you all for taking the time to do this. And I'd like to acknowledge David for being the only member of the coalition to be brave enough to come along. Pass that on to your other members. What I'd like to ask is, and David, you mentioned going beyond 2%. We know that the long-term return on investment in science can be anywhere between 3-1 to 15-1, depending on who you read. If that's the case, why aren't we investing more? And is there any other area in New Zealand where we would get the same return?
All of us? I'm quite happy to jump in on this. So you can get similar returns if you invest in warmer Kiwi homes, for example. And this government's cut funding to warmer Kiwi homes, one of the programs to insulate homes. Essentially, what you're asking is where can we best invest money? And we've heard from David that there's a limited amount. Actually, there's a difference between investing in something that's non-productive and investing in productivity for our nation. So giving a $3 billion tax cut to landlords is an example of non-productive investment, largely non-productive investment. Cancelling an inter-island ferry with a major trading partner costing close to $750 million is a non-productive use of capital. Whereas investing in our science system with the return we can get, and that will require reform of our tax system as well, or the use of debt, but it boosts productivity. And in that case, that's a useful use of capital to boost productivity. So we need to differentiate between those choices that are reducing our productivity, killing off our public service, replacing them with AI, or boosting our support base. We need to differentiate where we want to spend.
I think there's a real risk that when we talk about investing in the science sector, it's sort of ring-fenced as being this thing that sits separate from everything else in our lives and our worlds. And it won't surprise you to know that we've been talking a lot about jobs, health and homes, and also about real action on the cost of living as the key issue or issues for most New Zealanders. And I think that if we look at how our science sector, how our innovation community can address and support those issues, that's a way that we can see a path to in my personal opinion, a path to increased investment in that sector to address those real everyday cost of living issues that so many New Zealanders are facing.
Yeah, thank you for the really good question, sir. I think that's great. One of the issues that we had in our research institute is one side was economic development research and the other was social development research. And one of the great things that came out of that was early work on restorative justice and what the cost benefit of utilising restorative justice could be. And you guessed it, it landed on me to do the cost benefit analysis. But it was really instructive because I had the discussion with one of the researchers who was a researcher into children. She said, how do you think you improve productivity in New Zealand? I said, well, we work better and we work smarter and we innovate and blah, 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 blah. And she said, well, if you invested more in years 0 to 3, here's the graph that will show you that productivity will rise substantially more. And that's the same argument you're using, right? And that is that if you invest more in basic research, the long run will get this huge return. And by the way, gaming beats it at the moment by something stupid in terms of ROI. But nonetheless, I think you're right. Slightly different from Reuben and Labour in our understanding is that we land on the point that we need prosperity and we need to get ourselves back in the black as much as we possibly can. And our way towards that is growth, savings and investment. So we're more economically focused. We know we need to build more prosperity to afford the things we need. And I know your argument has come straight back to me that actually part of that is basic research, which is why I said, yeah, it'd be great to get above 2%. I agree with you. At the moment, sitting in the finance, putting my finance hat on there, I'm like at pain. Going back to Reuben's point, there's trade-offs and we've got a lot to deal with. So if we can find a way, whether it's mission-led, we can bring science together to focus on something that's really going to improve New Zealand. Along those lines, I think government will come around.
Thanks for the question. One other area that does come to mind for me is having a very high return on public investment is primary healthcare. So there are a few other options out there where we could be actually making ourselves quite a lot better off by investing. And science is definitely one of those areas. You're completely right. I think, every government, every party is willing to sing the praises of science. They're willing to tell you how great it is and what wonderful jobs all of our scientists are doing and what the research is. But then when budget time comes around, they just don't put their money where their mouth is. I think if you want to have that impact, then you should vote for a party that's made a very strong commitment to raise spending on science and technology, science and innovation. There are not so many of those out there.
All right, can we thank all of our panellists today, please? And also thank you to you, the audience, both here and online, for attending this. We really hope you'll go back to your workplaces, to your families, to your communities, and talk about what you've heard here today and make sure that we do discuss science policy in this election, because in the Save Science Coalition we think it's really vital that this be discussed. And I will now close us out. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te urutapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara takatu, koia rā e rongo, whakairea ake ke runga, kia tina, tina, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora.
Thank you.